Welcome in, everybody. My name is Joe Olive. I'm with the Maine Broadband Coalition. This is Let's Talk Broadband. It's a weekly call that we have, though not on this Zoom link, but on another Zoom link that's recurring. You can find it on the public events calendar on our website. Today, we are joined by Brooke Barron and Meghan Grabill. Brooke Barron's from the NTIA, and Meghan is from MCA. She's the mapping person there, and we're going to talk about project service areas today. This is kind of part two of our special Let's Talk Broadband stuff that we've been doing this month. And so I guess without further ado, I'll toss it over to Brooke and or Meghan, whoever wants to start.
Great. Hey everybody. I think I'm going to start and then I'll turn over to Megan and then we can both field questions. Good morning, everybody. Hi. For those of you I don't know yet, I'm Brooke. I'm NTIA's Federal Program Officer in Maine, working on the BEAD and digital equity programs. I live in Harpswell, and I work for the federal NTIA. So part of my role is to help Maine Connectivity Authority navigate the many requirements that go with these once-in-a-generation grant programs, and also to be a resource to you all as industry and community partners. So I know most of you have heard the BEAD 101 spiel before, so we're just going to do a quick overview before getting further into the weeds on the upcoming milestones for BEAD, particularly the release of project service areas. So to set the table, NTIA is a federal agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce. We are the ones tasked by Congress with implementing over $48 billion in funding in order to connect every single American to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet, and to do so equitably with a community-driven approach. So that funding, that directive come from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which you also might hear called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA, signed into law by President Biden in 2021. So to start, I just want to be really clear on the big picture because BEAD represents a different approach on funding broadband than the federal government has ever tried before. We all know about the many broadband programs the federal government has run over the past couple of decades, with folks in DC making decisions about which ISPs and which communities to fund. And this is not that. This is not a normal federal grant program. This is really a universal coverage program, and the tools that are being used to get there are grants. So if a location comes through the other side of the Maine State Challenge process and is deemed to be unserved or underserved by high-speed internet, it is not only BEAD eligible, there's actually now an obligation to fund internet service to that location. So BEAD is federally funded and state-led. So it's up to Maine Connectivity Authority to take that $272 million in funding allocated by NTIA and find a way to serve every BEAD eligible location. And it must do so following the requirements for community input, climate resiliency, workforce standards, affordability to the end subscriber, with an investment of over $42 billion nationwide. It's really essential that the infrastructure we're funding will be affordable, reliable, and universal. So when we're talking about the definition of project areas, there are some guardrails that state broadband offices have to fall within. In the federal Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, NTIA describes those requirements. It says that states may solicit proposals from prospective subgrantees at the geographic level of its choosing, for example, on a per location basis, per census block basis, per town, per county, or another geographic unit. An eligible entity, that's State Broadband Office, may alternatively solicit proposals for project areas it defines itself, or ask prospective subgrantees to define their own project areas. And we've seen other states use counties, school district boundaries, zip codes, census block groups. All of that works, and NTIA defers to the states about what works best, taking into consideration their unique geographies, communities, existing network infrastructure, and capabilities of its providers. So with that really 40,000-foot overview of what BEAD is and the relationship between NTIA and state partners here, I can turn over to Megan and the MCA team to describe the path that they have chosen on project service areas. And then we can take it from there.
Great, thanks, Brooke. So I do have a little presentation because when we are talking about mapping concepts, it's easier to see than describe sometimes. So starting out with our project service areas and what these are. So project service areas for Maine are going to be polygons, otherwise known as areas, and then those are composed of all the broadband serviceable locations. So all of the points that are on the FCC map. Those points have gone through the state-led challenge process and have been altered, and so are not exactly the same as the service availabilities that you see in the FCC map. When we make the PSAs, we're required to make sure that at least 80% of the locations inside of that area are or underserved locations. So only 20% of them can have more than the 100/20 download upload. And also not part of a planned or future funded existing build. What these project service areas become are the building blocks that will form the applications during the subgrantee selection process. So potential applicants will come in, select any number of project service areas into a single application, and then put that forward as a bid. And then we have more details on how that was created on our website and kind of a little bit more information about the PSAs generally. So how this falls in the context of BEAD as far as the timelines so far. So after we submitted and received approval for our initial proposals, we went through the state-led challenge process. People submitted challenges, then we had rebuttals, then we adjudicated. We're on the cusp of submitting our final results, hopefully today. And then all of that information will get published to the website for anyone to take a look at. The final draft PSAs will be created from that data that we're submitting today. And we can't actually consider this final until we get the final seal of approval from NTIA on the unserved and underserved lists. And once we get that, we will be making the PSAs ahead of time. We'll just be referring to them as draft. We don't foresee a great amount of change in our and underserved list based on the approval from NTIA, but it is a small risk we take that we will have to make tweaks or see changes without that approval. So PSAs, like I said, we've just been going through the state-led challenge process. We've been sharing around this presentation and the methodology, asking for any input on it generally. And through this process, we've come up with a refined idea of what the PSA creation will look like. The last component, like I said, is the state-led challenge process data. So now we have how we're going to do it and we have what we're going to do it to. So now I just have to run the analysis and make these final PSAs. These final PSAs, you'll see a nearly final version of them when we open the pre-qualification portal in mid-September. And they will not change significantly after that point, but there are always some shifting things happening. We could learn during the pre-qualification process that there is lots of interest in some areas and not interest in other areas. And so there might be some small shifts in what the PSAs look like from pre-qualification to the final version that's seen during actual subgrantee selection. So how these are actually created, we take the un and underserved points and run a spatial analysis on them, and it groups them together based on their density and their distribution. So it tends to group like points together and then create separate clusters for different different distances of those groupings. After we've run this spatial analysis, then we do some further refinement, and that's based on items like geographic features, so rivers and lakes, roads, railroads. We're looking to try to make this as similar to an ISP build as would be expected. We don't want to be creating project areas that put up boundaries and wouldn't naturally fit together. We try to follow the road networks. There's other boundaries that we use to cut the PSAs down. And as we're going through this process, we are taking input on these inputs and seeing if any additional, if we're missing any of the characteristics that would make for a good PSA. Once we have the PSAs created, then we start to look at them partially for our own internal edification and just for the types of things that we believe applicants would be looking at. So is this near to existing plant of a particular type? Is this a bunch of random points that are at the very end of an existing build, or are these points that are just like randomly scattered with no nearby existing service? And we try to take some of these characteristics and put them into the PSAs so that as we're looking at our model, we're kind of getting an idea for the flavor of each of the PSAs. So to give you an idea of some of the examples of what I've been working with, this is a picture of some one of the many runs we've done at creating the PSAs. And what tends to happen first in the first run is that we get these groupings of these, you know, they're less populated because they aren't our like fully built out areas, but they're still somewhat populated. And so they tend to group together. And we get these natural little groupings of PSAs. And then surrounding that, we get these little gray dots, which are referred to in the model as noise. But these are locations where there's really no existing infrastructure. It doesn't make sense to grab them into an existing PSA. And they're just so far flung from each other that they are kind of separate locations. These are locations, these like noise locations, we're expecting to bundle into like the township grids that that are available like through MEGIS. So that town and townships layer, once you kind of get out into that township range looking grid pattern, we plan to bundle these noise locations with those separate from the PSAs where we have the grouped locations. So a deep look at the 80-20 rule, which sounds very simple on its surface, but gets really confusing once you actually like dig into it spatially. So originally, all these orange dots were un- and underserved locations that were part of a single PSA. And the PSA was too large, too many points in it, and there's a river over here. So we cut along the river and made PSA, there's municipal boundary, cut another PSA out down here. In our first giant one, this one is almost 100%, except for, you know, there's like one served location here. These green points are all served locations. So there's like one served location out of a few hundred maybe points in this polygon. So this one passes the 80-20 rule. It's fine, it's good to go. This next one that we created, this kind of different green color, we have some served locations in it, but they probably are not tipping us above the 20% threshold. So there's still more than 80% of the locations in this one are underserved locations. Therefore, we can kind of keep this polygon the way it is. However, this polygon down here at the very bottom, There is a lot of served locations in here. Like we're approaching probably like a 60-40 for underserved to served locations. And therefore we have to cut out some of these served locations. And so what our options are is to like physically cut them out. And so this area is no longer part of a service area. And then we can either end up with two new project service areas, or this might still be one project service area. It just is no longer contiguous. And that will depend on what we see happening kind of through this section. I already talked about this a little bit, just dividing these PSAs. We tried to keep PSAs at less than 1,000 BSLs, just to keep them of a similar size as we think about like the building blocks for putting them together. And so we've used some different political boundaries to cut PSAs apart. On this one, there's a river going right through the... Oh. Is there a question? Okay. There's a center going right through the middle of these pink dots. And so what we've done is cut the PSAs for each side of the river. And so one set of these pink dots will be with one set of PSAs, the other side of the river will be with another set of PSAs, because if there's not a bridge or an easy access point across here, it doesn't make sense to have all these dots, even though they're very close together, be part of the same PSA. And that is not to say that somebody couldn't come in here as a potential applicant and say, well, actually, I just want to bid on all of them. I don't want them separated, and I do want to bid on all of them. And they could put them together into an application. And same with this division as well. So next steps. Early September, like this week or next, we're submitting our results to NTIA. Those will get published to the website. That will be a great opportunity for anybody who wants to look at the un- and underserved list to get our most up-to-date version of what is going to be BEAD eligible. And again, it's a draft list until we get approval, but we think it's a fairly close approximation to what the final list is going to look like. And so it's out there. It will be out there for use. September, we're going to have pre-qualification. It's going to go live with our draft PSAs. And through the end of September and into early October, we're doing that little tweaking of PSAs just to make sure that everything makes sense. And then in October through November right now, we're slated to have the subgrantee spatial tool with the actual PSAs in them and the bidding process go live. With that, I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Brooke. Do folks have any questions that they want to ask? I know that I have a couple, but I will wait my turn if others have questions. And you can either just hop on camera or throw it in the chat, and happy to ask from there as well. But if there's nothing, noise jumping off mic, I'm happy to. My question, or kind of one of the things that you mentioned, was the noise locations and transposing that into the township grid. I'm a little unclear about what that means in terms of, like, are those to be bundled in a way for like fixed wireless to come and pick them up, that type of thing, or what's like the plan with those locations?
So those
if
locations,
they're not going to fit, yeah.
If they don't fit into the grouped PSAs, that is just the tool, the mechanism we're going to use for grouping them into a PSA. So those PSAs will still be available in the tool for bid for any technology that is interested in bidding on them in any way that they want.
Gotcha. So they'll be like single points, as opposed like a single point kind of PSA as opposed to grouped.
I mean, in some of the Northwoods, it is, yeah, like a single point in one township. In a lot of the townships, it is more than one. It's just they're like all over the township, right? Like it's like 5 or 10, and some of them it is actually quite a few. So it's not to say, yeah, that it's like any one answer in those locations. It's just the mechanism we're using to group them. Yeah, and we will not have the points available on the pre-qualification tool. We will have those available during the subgrantee tool, so that when you're looking at the PSAs in the subgrantee tool and doing the actual bidding, you can see where the points are actually located in the PSA. However, in the pre-qualification one, we do have a summary function, and it will tell you how many of each of the un and underserved are in, and ineligible locations are in that PSA.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
And Joe, I just want to double click on something really important that Megan just said. All of the PSAs are open to all of the applicants. There's no, as long as the applicant comes in through the pre-qualification process and they've demonstrated to us that they can meet the requirements that NTIA and MCA have set forth for the BEAD program, there are no specified technologies per PSA. There are no specified applicants per PSA. It is an open playing field for everybody.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so this, like where we're at right now, in terms of the pre-qualification process, it's like we're building a roster of ISPs who are eligible essentially to, when it's time to open up this portal, to hop on and start bidding.
I would qualify that with one, it's not just ISPs. This is if there's a community or a group of communities, a broadband utility district, a regional government, again, as long as they can demonstrate that they meet the requirements to be able to administer a BEAD grant, anybody is welcome.
Cool. Elaine and Obi. Is Obi the page?
Obi's now off eating, but anyway.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, my question was, will there be available a list of the qualified ISPs and municipalities and everything else once they go through the qualification process? Will a list be published?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. We'll be sharing that ahead of the project application period once they've all made it through.
Perfect. Thank you.
Just another question in terms of timeline. Could you bring that slide back up with the timeline of all that? Because I just think it might be useful again to see that. Just in terms of like expectations around this type of thing. Cool.
This is the one you want to see? Is that?
Yeah, it totally works. It totally works. So yeah, is there, I know we spoke about this in the last recorded session that we had with Jenna on, but I'm curious about like I guess like community role when these PSAs come out. Like, let's say there's an active broadband committee in X town. Will there be some sort of way for them to see like what the PSAs are, beyond yeah, I don't know. I guess, yeah, that's my question. I don't know how to phrase it all that well, but I'm curious if there's like some conversation that happens there with communities.
Yes. So the pre-qualification tool, once we launch it, will be completely public. And so this is also the opportunity for anyone who has interest to go to the map. The map portion will be completely public. Actually, the portal will be completely public as well. If you wanted to go in there and see what the application form looked like there's nothing stopping you from being a fake applicant other than like our sanity for like clearing all of those out later, but it'll be fine. Okay, like we'll be fine. We would prefer you to use the PDF version that'll be available on the website if you're that curious. However, the whole thing will be completely public. The mapping tool will be completely public. It is a link. People will click on it. They'll go to the page and they'll be able to see where all the PSAs are. It's an interactive map. They'll be able to see the summation tool. And They could even print a map off from it if they would like, as that is the mechanism we're using for part of the pre-qualification, is asking potential applicants to select their area of interest and then submit that back through the portal.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
As the person who often has to clear out the applications that are not completed, I would urge you take a look. The guidance that we're going to release ahead of that will have the literal list of questions. So check out that guidance. If you really want to go create an application, that's cool too. But even just let us know if you're not planning to move through it, because all the way through it, because one of the things we really do try to do is monitor those applications as they're coming through and provide support to anybody who is going through that process. And it's just helpful for us to know how many of them are actual applications that we should be expecting to process at the end of that month period.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I will say I like maps, and I'm excited to see these maps. Just the way that they all get drawn up, I think it's going to be really interesting, especially like I know we've talked about this in the Let's Talk Broadband calls before, and Kendra Jo, this is something that you like to bring up, but just the idea that you know, like town or municipal boundaries are not like great at defining where networks should or shouldn't be built necessarily, depending on like where an ILEC footprint is or that type of thing. And sometimes it's easier to like take the cap off of kind of looking at it through the municipal scope and say like, okay, cool, like what are the locations that jump out and make sense? And just to see, I don't know, just it's going to be a fun thing to see Maine in just a different like lens like that. And I don't know if there's like a question that comes out of that for me, but yeah, I just want to say like good luck, Megan, with with getting all of this stuff in. I'm sure you've been really hard at work thus far, getting it to a point where you can even submit them to the NTIA. But anyways, Brooke.
Megan, I likely missed it, but did you share the anticipated number of PSAs ballpark? Is it still on the 700?
When I have been running the model, yeah, we've been around 700, although we have had quite a few grants come through. So yeah, I'm not going to say that that number is going to be significantly lower, but yeah, I love like trying to guess what the numbers are going to be. It's like part of the geek in me, I guess. But yeah, so I'm thinking we're going to track around 600 is my guess.
Cool. Exciting.
Which does, I think, Joe, speak to your point a little bit about these are not, right, these are not built by township boundaries. What we're tracking at right now is like less than 40,000 locations across the state of Maine that are going to be in the and underserved list, like BEAD eligible locations. And so there's like 530, right, communities or townships. So if you think about the 35,000 and not being in some communities and how that like math works out, like these are much smaller areas than a community, and gives that opportunity to like take a community and then take some like overlap and put the things together, and not build the project areas by any like predefined political boundaries.
Elaine.
Right, me again. Okay, so in my region, we have and Kendra Jo, you know exactly who I'm talking about. We have a community with a planned fiber build. They have a USDA grant that's about 4 years old right now. So therefore, they would not be part of a PSA eligible for BEAD. However, if they were considering turning that funding back over, returning it back to USDA and just washing their hands of it, I'm just wondering, how would they go about then becoming part of a PSA again? Or becoming one, period, part of one?
So we are actually working through understanding what that mechanism is with NTIA currently, and we do have some paths forward for this, and that's as much as I'm going to say before letting Brooke jump in and
Well, and Brooke, this is something we've talked about, but is there a path for, I mean, I know we can remove locations from new enforceable commitments. Can we add locations from enforceable commitments that go away? And this would be the same with an RDOF default.
Right. They, for now, it will be considered on a case-by-case basis, while we're working on finalizing guidance. But yes, the intention is for locations that default at this early stage, before subgrantee selection, would have an opportunity to be served. It gets a lot more complicated once the subgrantee selection has gone out.
So I think
would add
just go for it.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to say, I think that means like really soon, Elaine.
Yeah.
It's a conversation we should have like next week, as we're
Yes.
pulling together locations for final
Okay.
PSAs.
Yes, thank you. All right,
Yes.
I will try to get that word out there, and yeah, let's schedule a meeting, please.
Yeah,
Yes.
Elaine, let's follow up. I think there's probably a conversation to be had with the state office and the USDA that's not an FPO, but GFR before NDC before they make that call. But it is a quick moving
It is, and
process.
so I will let the community know that they need to decide sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Just yeah, sorry. One more question about the noise locations. Generally speaking, these would be the locations that we would consider the highest cost, right?
Yes and no. So a lot of the noise locations, yes, because like think the Northwoods, like think those points that are just like very, very distant, miles from each other, miles from anything else. Those ones, yes, extremely high cost. Like to build fiber all that way, very expensive. However, some of the noise locations are in areas that are actually served, and they are those points that are down, a 1 mile dirt road that there's only one house at the end of it. And nobody has wanted to go there that full mile, right, and build that out. So they are still fairly high cost, but they're high cost in a way that's different than like the Northwoods. And there's even some that, like they are 1,501 feet from like the fiber plant, right? And like they are super close, but just like not close enough to have made the business case. And you'll see those also mixed in with those kind of like higher served areas. So there are some noise locations that like maybe they could sneak in as a line extension. But yeah, as a general rule of thumb, they're higher cost.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'll be just like helpful when looking maybe at the maps when they come out and just saying like, okay, yeah, right on. Like this is what you can kind of assume.
I do think it's important. I want to reinforce, Joe, that we are looking to strategically set the extremely high cost per location threshold on a PSA by PSA level. So that is going to give us the ability to look at that thoughtfully and not just set a kind of robotic limit that says, all right, great, everything above this amount gets alternative technology, everything below it doesn't. So we can look at those with a common sense approach to say, yeah, it's 1,500 3 feet, right? Like it's going to take a bit more to get some fiber there, but that's 100% worth it versus this is 5 miles down a dirt road all by itself. Like that cost is just going to be really much too high to run wireline plant to. So that is part of our review process on the back end. And we're grateful to have that kind of flexibility so that it doesn't have to be too formulaic.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I appreciate the fact that you guys are taking a flexible approach to that, because I just think that is going to be an interesting thing to dig into when it's all said and done, where it's like, yeah, what were the distinctions between this getting fixed wireless and this getting fiber? And I'm curious if there's going to be any like kind of if any of that like kind of thought process will be public information, or if that's just for MCA and like when all the stuff comes in you're reviewing, just as a matter of like, not like transparency necessarily, but just as a matter of like, yeah, getting a look inside, look underneath the hood, so to speak.
Well, I mean, I think at a minimum, you'll get to see, I mean, and Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong, we will need to provide to NTIA a list of, if we have 35,000 eligible BEAD locations, we need on a location by location basis, we're going to be providing the kind of technology and the solution and the subgrantee that we're proposing in the final proposal. I think, Joe, to your question, I think we will do our best to share the methodology that was used and kind of the process that we went through on the back end after we received the applications. There's going to be a lot of explanation of, we're going to have to deconflict these projects where there's 1 or 2 overlapping PSAs, and obviously the BEAD scoring criteria gives us some guidance on how to do that. But we're going to do our best to explain exactly how we got to the final decision. I think waiting on future guidance on exactly what elements need to be included in the BEAD final proposal. But I think that is a lot of what will be included in there is kind of the picture of how MCA took the plan that we lay out in the initial proposals and then applied it with the actual data, with the actual applications that we receive.
Cool.
And the one thing I'll add to that, Joe, is MCA in their approved volume 2, they do lay out the like the data sources they'll be taking into account to determine that threshold. So it's not like just based on someone's opinion. It's based on a whole confluence of factors that are
I am also appreciative that it's not just a vibes based type
assessment.
Mia asked
Thanks.
in the chat.
I was gonna to go right there. I was wondering if Margaret and Megan could respond to Mia about kind of the approach that we'll take with PSAs that don't get a bid.
So PSAs that don't get a bid are a difficult problem for us to tackle. What our plan is to hopefully generate, thank you, whoever, Brooke, generate some interest in those after we get through the first round of bidding and see if any of them make sense to be pulled in to other applications. And then after that, I'm forgetting what volume 2 says.
I think we have a number of tools at our disposal. We have, there's the waiver of the match requirement. So BEAD has a 25% match requirement. We have the ability to employ that for those locations. We also have the ability to look at how alternative technology could play a role in those if they do exceed the extremely high cost per location threshold. And I forget, Brooke, there's a couple of words we use, right? Like induce and incentivize prospective applicants or applicants who have come in to serve those. So I think it is going to be very much that is going to be our late winter and spring is going to be a lot of those conversations. There's actually a whole section in the initial proposal volume 2 of what we're going to do for those PSAs that don't receive bids. And I'm not remembering it off the top of my head. It's like 2.5 point something, I think, Brooke.
Yep.
We'll post the link to that in there in the chat.
I think Margaret got it linked up. Thank you for that, Margaret.
Yeah, there's a flurry of helpful information that just flooded
Yeah.
into the chat. I'm trying to keep up. Um, just to go off that though, it's like I guess I can envision a scenario where it's I guess I'm yeah, just and perhaps it spells it all out in volume two. But just like the when you're doing outreach to these ISPs around no bid PSAs, is it like is the kind of prioritization like those who are already in the neighborhood type thing? You know what I mean? Like if there's already an ISP that's, in town, is that like kind of the first person who you reach out to and say, hey, how about picking up XYZ?
I think those that are in the area that came in through the PSA process, right? Like, are there other PSAs that are nearby and that they just didn't include into their application that maybe make sense? Can we incentivize those enough to be brought in through that mechanism? And then we have, as Brian detailed, the other mechanisms as ways to try to get all of these served.
Cool. Any other questions? Comments?
I would just add that this is an ongoing process. So as Megan and Brooke outlined, we'll have pre-qualification. We'll be able to know who those eligible entities are, if there's communities, if there's utility districts, any existing municipally owned that are looking to expand to pick up PSAs just outside of their community border, ISPs, both those that are already existing and operating in Maine, and maybe ones that are new to the Maine connectivity space. So the more we know with each stage, the better we'll be able to provide those updates and information as we move forward and how it's directly impacting your community. Really appreciate folks that have been following this for a while and those that are newer and just trying to get a handle of what's going on. Alan, I followed up with you in the chat with some just a numbers breakdown of how we look at the town of Limestone and what that will kind of look like as it fits into BEAD for locations. That's just, it's really helpful. And if you have, community members, I know we've got some regional partners on. If you have community members who are interested in knowing, what exactly does this mean for our community? How many locations are we talking about in terms of BEAD eligible locations, those no connection unserved as defined by Maine's speed standards? Point them to that map on our policy page, point them to me, but point them to this conversation that's happening weekly so that we can make sure we're getting them the information and they just have a space where they can ask questions. There's no question too small or too complex. And as we keep moving ahead, as Megan mentioned, we will have draft PSA maps as our pre-qualification window opens. That'll be another opportunity to dig in a little bit around what does this mean for your community and region. There's a good chance that those PSAs are going to overlap with other communities, so it's not just in one, or that your community will have more than one to try to address all those existing locations. And I just really appreciate Brooke and Megan and Margaret and Brian hopping on to be able to back me up every now and then on things that are a little out of my wheelhouse. So, Megan.
I did see the couple of note from Brian that I didn't double click on that I always forget to double click on, the difference in the service classifications between Maine service classifications and the BEAD service classifications, which are confusingly named the same words, but for different things. So when you're looking at our policy map, the BEAD eligible locations are only the locations identified as no connection and unserved. Underserved locations on our policy map are not BEAD eligible. Those are above they're at 120 or above. So the speed for BEAD to be eligible is 100 over 20. It's less than 100 over 20.
Anything else?
Joe, you just want to start the weekend.
No, not at all. Not at all. Because I was gonna honestly kind of switch gears here, really quick. Um, no, I'm a workaholic. You know that about me, Elaine. And if my bosses are watching this, I want to keep working.
I'll put my information in the chat if folks have questions about this. I think addressing them to me first, and I'll try to get you the answer that you need. If we have to pull in Megan or Margaret, we will do so. But I want to keep their inbox clear so they can focus on, those more complex things like 700 PSAs. But yeah, I think Joe, shifting gears for our last 10 to 15 minutes is great. And my team, you're welcome to stay. But if you need to hop, thanks for the time and joining us.
Thank you. See you later.